I was going to come here and talk about something really clever. But then, well, first it didn't quite work out for me, and then I decided to just talk about sex to kind of get you all warmed up for Kwame. Yeah? I am indeed a mother and a teacher and a wife and an author. And I want to tell you about some of my experiences, especially from the perspective of being a teacher. In my novel, The Secret Lives of Baba Segi's Wives, I address sexual violence. And it's something that I'm really quite passionate about, especially in Africa. But I'll tell you what really got me thinking. About 2 years ago, I'm a deputy principal, by the way. One of the science teachers came to me and she was carrying this book, a science textbook. And she told me that a parent had actually stapled the pages on reproduction and had given the boy instructions not to even sit in class if the teacher had decided to talk about reproduction. So this teacher, of course, was extremely worried. She didn't know what to do, and she came to talk to me. And it got me thinking, if a 12-year-old isn't being spoken to about sex, what kind of chance do they really have in Africa, you know, in this day and age? Because, you know, the influences are there, and unfortunately, they're all quite negative. But I thought I'd ask you very quickly, how many of you think sexual violence against women is on the increase in Africa at the moment? Do you think so? Yeah? I certainly do, because you hear about corrective rape in South Africa, in East Africa. You've got men who are raping young children in order to find a cure for HIV. And very recently in Nigeria, everybody was talking about the ABSU 5, the 5 young men who decided to gang rape an undergraduate. And of course, in North Africa, stories are coming in about what was actually happening to some of those women who are being recruited as bodyguards for the late Gaddafi. So I want to tell you about some of these influences because I want us to start thinking about what it is that we can do for our young boys, because it's the lives of our daughters who are at stake here. So I started thinking, okay, let's look across the continent. How about Swaziland with that king who's got how many wives now? I think it's 12. And that particular wife was having an affair with, I think it was the Minister of Justice. And I thought to myself, okay, you've got 12 wives. That means he's, you know, maybe visiting them, each one maybe twice in a month. And he expects them to, of course, just sit there. And I thought to myself, you know, all those emails that I get about getting a penis enlargement, I need to send that to him. But not for him to get it enlarged. Surely if they can enlarge a penis, they can maybe multiply it, because you need at least 4 penises to be able to satisfy 12 women. And of course, you have in South Africa, you have President Jacob Zuma, who says polygamy is our culture. And it really worries me when people say that, because it's always when they're trying to defend something that's actually, something that's totally ridiculous, that people decide to say, it's our culture, we're going to stay with it, please, you know? And then, of course, come to Nigeria. We actually have a president who apparently died. He kind of met his maker after having an encounter with some women that he had imported from some other country. We don't know if it's true, so that's why I'm just leaving it kind of vague. And in Nigeria, let me just come to Nigeria now and talk about some of the things that I have found quite horrifying. And some of the forces that lead me to really worry about our young boys. I mentioned earlier the ABSU 5, the fact that 5 young men decided to rape, to gang rape a young woman. And of course, they recorded it. So it was all over YouTube. And the commissioner for police of that state actually said, he really said this. He said, I looked at that video and she looked like she might have been enjoying it. Not only that, not in these exact words, he said that he was, you know, of the mind that perhaps this girl had offended one of the boys, and then that boy decided to assemble his friends to teach her a lesson she would never forget. So we have our young boys, you know, they're listening to that sort of stuff and absorbing it. And then we have our press in Nigeria. God love them, you know, but every time a woman is raped, they always describe the rape as being randy. So you'll read sometimes the headlines, randy man rapes neighbor. And I don't know if it's that they don't quite, you know, understand. I mean, that word, for goodness sake, I used to use that word when I was about 22. You know, when you're talking about some of your friends, or maybe when I was a bit older as well, and a friend of yours, perhaps the spouse has gone away for 2 weeks, and you start to use that word. But it's certainly not a word that you would use when you're talking about that level of violation. It trivializes it. And of course, some of our institutions, if you come to Nigeria now, some of the universities, you'll find that all the students, when they go to class, they all have to wear lab coats, especially if they're in the science department, because apparently they dress too provocatively. So they dress this way, and I think it must be that the lecturers get nervous. So it's this abdication of responsibility. Whatever happens, it's that girl that made me do it. And we have the National Assembly, and you won't believe this, it's just about 2 weeks ago. One of them came out and said, one of our senators, and said, well, if a man opens the door of a car for a woman, it's either the car is new or the woman is new. And of course, let's not forget dear Senator Ahmed Yerima. I'm sure you've heard of him. He, I think it was a year or 2 ago now, imported an Egyptian wife. And this girl, of course, well, it started out that she was 12. And then in about 2 weeks, after about 2 weeks, they started saying she was 14. It's all that juju we do in Africa. You know, anything can happen in 2 weeks. And I'm telling you, again, about a week ago, it's very difficult for me because I really don't want to mention names unless I want to embarrass the person like I just did with the senator. But a particular rapist was in court, and he came out, and after the judge asked him if he had anything to say, he said, I apologize to the court for what I did. I apologize to the husband, but it was her beauty that enticed me and made me do it. So you hear these sorts of stories, and these are the stories that our sons are listening to. I have a 15-year-old son, and I'm constantly asking him, did you hear about that? Did you read about it? What did you think? And a lot of people think I just enjoy talking about sex. Well, it's true, really. But it's more than that for me. And I want to tell you a little bit about what I did in writing The Secret Lives of Baba Segi's Wives. There is quite a graphic rape scene. And the reason I decided I was going to put that in the book, it wasn't actually in the original story, was that a very good friend of mine, we'd been friends for about 6 years. And then one day we were having dinner together, and she started to tell me what had happened to her and how she'd been raped. And I tried to make sure that the way I presented it in the book was as close as possible to the experience that she had. Why did I do that? Well, after the experience, she actually had a nervous breakdown, and she was admitted to the psychiatric unit at the UCH, and she was there for 6 months. She was only 16 years old. And her father said to her, "It's best we keep this quiet. Don't tell anyone, because it might ruin your prospects of getting a husband, when you're older." So they didn't tell the police. They kept it a secret. They kept it a family secret to protect her. Well, you might think, that's a horrible thing, but in a way, from the perspective of a parent, what you want is to protect your child's future. She's happily married now, actually. But I really wanted it to be there, that section of the novel, because I wanted to speak out on her behalf. And I have come to believe that part of the problem, especially with our young boys, is that sometimes they do get sex education in school, but we're not talking about sexual violence. We're not talking about the damage that it does to the young women in Africa. And you can imagine, when I was at university, it happened all the time. You'd just hear that somebody was raped and some other girl was raped. It would happen. And you'd see them 2 days later at university in the lectures, and it would be like, oh, okay, let's just move on. Nobody was brought to book. There were just no consequences. I started writing about sexual violence and about issues like rape because I wanted to humanize my people. I'm one of those authors who come out and say, and I really do mean this, that my audience, when I'm writing anything, is actually African. I'm addressing my fellow Africans. They are the ones that I'm talking to when I write. And I believe that through writing, through reading, as long as we can get more people to actually read, perhaps young men especially will develop some empathy. I know that it doesn't necessarily happen that way, and it's not necessarily that simple. But you have dramas and plays, and you hope that somehow when people watch these plays, they'll be influenced or inspired by what they have just seen. This is what I hope to do, and this is what I've been thinking of, even with my next novel, of doing. I want to write about issues that will make people start thinking before they actually carry out different acts. And also, I use sex in my novel as a metaphor for freedom. As I did say to you earlier, people think it's gratuitous and I just talk about sex. But you know what? There are all sorts of sex. And we need to start drawing the distinctions between, sex that is wholesome, sex that is healthy, sex that is violent, sex that harms and hurts, sex that heals. There's all sorts. And this is what I try to capture in my novel. And this is what I continuously try to do with my writing. So how do we reach these boys? This is the bit that's been really tough for me. How do we reach these young men especially? How do we talk to them? Well, those boys who decided to film that horrible, heinous act that they committed against that girl, I think it would be difficult for you these days to come across any young person in Nigeria that doesn't have a phone, a mobile phone. It's very important. And I really think that it's time that the government used this tool as a way of getting information out to our young people, especially to let them know that there might be, it's very difficult to say there will be, but it's important that they know that there could be consequences for these acts, but also to get information out about just letting people know how their acts affect other people. It's something that we need to really work on in Africa, not only to save our young boys, but also to save our daughters. Thank you very much.
Aha.